so now we're going to go into the input editor. I'm just going to delete these things I have created already. And I'm going to create a cube. Should I do it? Yeah, I'll do a cube. And I want to add a little resolution to it. So if we go to my channel box, I can also see a list of the inputs for this mesh in the channel box. And it has that section called inputs. So right now this mesh doesn't exist by itself. It's being told how to exist right now by this polycube 1 node, and therefore I can change its divisions up. And I'm going to, now I can edit these. If you guys may have noticed, but you can edit these by clicking an attribute or drag selecting multiple attributes, and then you can middle mouse click in the viewport, and you can update these values just by dragging your mouse left and right. I'm just going to make this large enough that we can see it without having to zoom in too much. I'm just going to enter an exact value, and I'll add a couple more divisions. Okay, and I'm put it into shaded mode. Okay, so there's my cube. Now, with my cube selected, now, and this is something to really take note of. Every time before you start rigging, you want to go through like kind of a model check, and you want to make sure that there's not any history on your mesh. And what that means is, if you look over here in your channel box, there shouldn't be anything listed there. Right now I have pcube1 or polycube1 as an input. I need to get rid of that before I start rigging, or it could possibly mess things up. With that in mind, and we'll explain this throughout the class, but once you've started rigging, you don't want to add any unnecessary history or inputs into your mesh, because it further complicates your character. It makes it harder for the computer to manipulate, and it's not necessary. So that's where you want to make sure your model and mesh are very nicely done before you even begin. And that's hard to know at this stage, but you'll get a feel for it. So how do you get rid of history? All you have to do is hold down your space bar and go to Edit, Delete by Type, History. And you can see that that input section in my channel box went away entirely. Okay, and I'm going to rename this to box. And you can see that it automatically renames the shape node that's associated to it. I'll show you that in the hypergraph hierarchy. Display shapes. There's that relationship and hierarchically. And now with all the history cleared off, I'm going to put a bend deformer on this box, and I'm going to put a squash deformer on this box. So if I hold down my space bar and I have my animation menu set active, or I can go to hot. If you don't have that active, you can hold down your space bar, go to the hotbox control, and say show animation. Now I'm going to just say show animation only. And now when I hold my menu, hold my space bar down, I have just the animation menu set showing. So if I go to create deformer with my box selected, I can say non-linear, and I'm going to create a bend. I'm not going to go in the option box. I'm just going to, we'll manipulate that after the fact. So I created a bend. And it didn't do anything to my box yet because I haven't told it to. But I can manipulate the bend, the curvature here. So if I go on my channel box and my input, it added a new input called bend 1, correct? And in there's 4 attributes. The curvature attribute is the one I'm interested in currently. So if I manipulate that, I'm bending my box back and forth. Okay? Now, this bend is happening at a certain point in space. So if I turn on X-ray, you can see a little better what this bend deformer looks like. And the box is trying to follow this curve here. Now what happens if I move this bend deformer? Because it has its own transform. It does not, there's not a parent-child relationship here. It's just an inputs-outputs relationship. So if I move this bend around, I don't miss it. My computer's really struggling. You can see it changed how it bent it. Let's say I want, when this box bends, I only want it to ever bend from the top. So all I have to do is set the low bound attribute to 0. Because I don't want it to be I don't want that to affect my box in this case. But I need to increase the high bound. I need it to bend more of the box than just the lower half. So I need to increase my high bound to 2. You could also just play with that. You can increase it as much as you want to by selecting the attribute, middle mouse clicking and dragging, right? So I just happen to know that 2 is enough. Okay, now that's kind of our bend deformer. Now let's select our mesh again, and it already has one input. I can show you the input editor. If you right click on your box and go to inputs and all inputs, and you can see right now that it has this tweak node which always exists, and it has a nonlinear bend 1 node. These are the inputs for this particular box. So I'm going to add another one though, another nonlinear, and I'm going to do this one as a squash. So let's unbend it. So you notice when I have the squash, when it created that, it only has the squash selected, right? And so I can't see the bend anymore. So, but if I select the box which the squash is affecting, then I can see both of them in the input section. And so here I'm going to set my bend curvature attribute back to 0. So it's not bent. And you can see that it created my squash deformer off center to the cube. Well, it actually was the center when the cube was bent. So that's not what I wanted. So I'm going to hit delete on my keyboard and delete that squash. Now I'm going to select the box again. I'm going to create that same deformer squash. So this time it's centered to the box. Okay. Now I can play with this deformer, and the factor is the main attribute that we're concerned about with the squash deformer. And so that, if I increase that, it's going to stretch it out. If it goes below, if it goes to a negative value, then it smushes it flat. Okay, it also has a low bound, high bound.